Training is strategic, and it impacts your bottom line. Businesses need to train their customers to build loyalty, sales and partners teams to accelerate growth, and workforce to drive innovation. What if you could use a single platform to build learning experiences for customers, partners, and employees alike? Introducing Adobe Learning Manager, a perfect enterprise-ready platform that is built to scale. Make learning an experience.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Beyond Training, L&D's Role in the Employee Experience, sponsored by Adobe, BizLibrary, Torch, and Wisetail. I'm Emma, Marketing Associate at Training Industry, and your co-host for today's event. Before we get started, I have a couple housekeeping items to go over to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's sessions. Throughout today's event, please feel free to chat comments into the chat window and submit questions in the Q&A window. I'll be monitoring your comments and questions and saving your questions for the Q&A towards the end of the session. I have enabled closed captions for this event. You can turn them off or turn the subtitles on by locating the closed caption icon in your toolbar. We also encourage you to share the information you received today with your colleagues and network on social media. You can follow us at Training Industry so we're able to track your contribution to the conversation. At the end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey pop up in your browser. We'd appreciate your thoughts on today's event. We always value your feedback. It helps us improve for future events. And lastly, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you'll receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions after the event. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning leaders and development professionals like you. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk. We have articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, podcasts, and more. You can make Training Industry your go-to resource for learning solutions by visiting trainingindustry.com. All right, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker for today, Dr. Alan Partridge. Alan Partridge is the Director of Evangelism at Adobe and has over 20 years of experience in e-learning, education, games, and multimedia development. He has researched and reported on authentic learning solutions for audiences around the world for the past decade. Alan is recognized for his many online video tutorials and e-seminars, which are a mainstay for e-learning developers and trainers looking to create and deploy effective learning materials. Alan, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks to all of you for joining today. It's great to see you all. I'm making a mental note to myself that I'm getting a moire effect on my shirt today. So apologies for that. I'll have to try a more conservative shirt the next time around. Big thanks to Emma and the folks at Training Industry for making these sessions possible. And I'm looking forward to a really great session today. I just want to let you know that I will be leaving the chat pod open today as we go through this session. And that gives you guys a chance to have a conversation with me and with everyone else in the session. I always like to note, and it's absolutely always true, the wealth of the wisdom in the room is from all of the participants in the session. It can never really be from just one person. So I encourage you to use that chat pod and add your own thoughts and contributions today. The only thing that I ask is that you try to keep them on target. So as we go through and talk about points and ideas, I encourage you to chime in, talk about your own experiences and your own how the ideas resonate with you, or maybe if they're discordant, if there's something that you're like, oh, I don't agree with that at all. It's really helpful to go ahead and put that stuff in the chat pod. So I hope that you'll participate actively and share. Without any further ado, let's dig in and look at from knowledge to impact, maximizing business outcomes through effective learning experiences. All right, here we go. Now, throughout this session today, you're going to note that I have links to articles. Today's articles are coming from McKinsey, from Gartner, and I think those are the two places, although there are multiple articles. You can always click on those links in the downloadable version of this session. So if you download the session and then you want to see those articles or those pieces, remember that the hyperlinks are in the PDF version. You can just click on them and that'll take you to the article in question. This is largely a summary of a very interesting study from McKinsey that looks at the state of organizations in 2023. I thought that it was important to kind of sum this up in terms of where we might be able to leverage maximum impact in terms of aligning our businesses with a nod to where we are across the industry today. So I've summarized some of the research here, and you can follow along as we go, but I'm going to give you kind of a highlight sense of what the overall results were. One of the interesting notes from McKinsey in the first note was that as they surveyed people who were in learning leadership positions, that there was an increasing sense of shock and difficulty adapting. So a need to identify potential avenues and methodologies for resilience among teams because of the ever escalating speed of change. And that's not just about technology, it's also about approach and it's about culture. So when we look at that situation overall, we're talking about, okay, yes, of course, we all know that there's this sort of crazy exponential scale happening in technology that's been happening for quite a while. And that rapid nod to a point of singularity, to a point where we can't keep up with all the technological changes, is just a reality of today's landscape. But there's more than that to be considered. You also have to consider that the culture itself has undergone very rapid change. And we've seen changes in terms of the availability of personnel to fill positions. We've seen changes in a kind of widening gap between those who are sophisticated enough to handle modern technologies in business spaces and those who are continuing to exist outside of those spaces. And we've seen changes in the way that businesses are working, their processes. So all of those things are contributing to a sense of escalating speed, which creates a kind of anxiety fundamentally, and certainly for leaders, but also for workers. And in an ever escalating way, as we see through this report and the report from Gartner, it points toward more turbulence in the workforce, more and more people feeling able to jump to other positions at other organizations, or feeling a desire to follow through on that. And so one of the things we're going to see hit on this and all the other reports today is this question of how can we kind of stabilize, how can we normalize things and get back to a more stable workforce, because obviously there's a substantial cost involved when we have tons of people shifting around like that. The next thing up is that hybrid work models are continuing to grow. It's interesting to note that 4 out of 5 employees wanted to continue with a hybrid model of some sort. Now, I've seen a variety of studies on this. There are some employers who are, just dead set on getting people back into the office and leaving them there. There are others who have argued that, in fact, it's more effective and that they're ending up with better performance when people have differing models. But most are settling into kind of a middle ground where a hybrid is the preferred methodology, so that it's possible for people to conduct some meetings online, maybe attend a physical office space some of the time. There hasn't been a sort of huge rush to exclusively online everyone or exclusively offline everyone. It seems like more and more the approaches that are being favored are the sort of hybrid model. We are, of course, seeing people making way for AI. It's interesting then to note that between the 2019 study and the 2022 study cited here, the average number of AI capabilities that were being leveraged by the employees was about 3.8 AI capability. So think of that as, for example, they might be using a chat kind of generative tool, or they might be using a tool to support business or finance, or they might be using a tool for some other purpose, and they counted it in terms of each tool that was being accessed by employees that took the survey. It's worth noting that that number doubled between 2019 and 2022. I would expect that we're going to see that number more than double over the next year or two and continue to rise in that same fashion as we move forward. I wouldn't look for the trend to reverse at any point, because more and more organizations are discovering that in fact, there are huge opportunities for cost savings in terms of performance, in terms of people having opportunities to personalize the methods with which they are accomplishing things. And that can range from things that are most immediately of concern for us today, like learning and the increasing or escalating opportunities to personalize that learning, but it also will have direct implications on everything from how that learning is created, to how that learning is delivered, to how that learning is received, how we index it and understand it, how we convert it into an understanding of skills and talents, and how we eventually, hopefully, are able to chronicle those skills and talents and leverage them to understand the potential of our workforce in sort of methodology around talent, which can increasingly understand what people are all about. Now, I'm going to give you a grain of salt with that mention of talent and workforce and all of those things. We're still in kind of a rut here, in that skills continue to be something that the industry as a whole has not been great about codifying. What I mean by that is that ultimately we have seen a number of skill libraries. We've seen a number of attempts to understand what skills are across multiple organizations. I'm sure all of you have done needs analysis at your own organization to try and understand and codify the skills within your organization. Well, there are a number of things that the technologies surrounding skills have not agreed upon very well. And here's what I mean. When we think about a skill, it's an easy tendency to say, okay, well, that's a competency. Well, no, each of these are discrete in their own way. And so we don't necessarily understand, if we understand that a person has achieved a certain skill level in sales, for example, it's difficult to translate that into an understanding of how much will that impact the productivity of that individual in various sales situations. And the reason behind this is that ultimately, one, it may be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to codify every single skill into what all of the actual applied abilities and capabilities of that individual are. But two, we don't necessarily understand according to whom, like what is the reason for us to believe that this skill is accomplished? Is it because they've passed a quiz? Is it because they've demonstrated it through years of actual experience? Is it because they have testimonials from customers? Is it because they have testimonials from others who are on their equivalent level? Is it testimonials from managers or from leadership? Each of these things are not today very well segregated. And so if we try to look at that from a recruiting perspective or a project alignment perspective, it becomes a little tough to kind of figure out what does all that mean. And then we also have not really done a great job of sort of finding a consistent map to codify skills in a comparative way. So there's a lot of work to be done here. The hope and the interest is that AI can potentially help us to discern and understand discrete variations in these things, and then give us some additional mechanisms by which to sort of sort them. I've seen a lot of promise around this area, lots of organizations that are businesses that are sort of growing up around this idea of, we can produce these tremendous skill results for you to help you regularize. But I have yet to see a sort of fully functional one that's living up to its promises. When will it come? I'm not sure. It's very difficult given the exponential increase in technologies. difficult to predict when we'll get this kind of functional technology, or if there will be impediments that block it altogether. But definitely people are seeing that AI in general is helping them to solve major challenges. I think that the one other caveat, and then I'll move on because I can see that I'm going too slow already. The one other caveat here is that people are not asking the question, they're not seeing as a challenge or a problem AI. That AI is not on the challenge board, right? AI is a solution or a potential method to solve your existing challenges. So I would say to you, if you're starting to see things like this in a study and say, okay, well, everybody's paying attention to AI, I think the most successful organizations are paying attention to AI in the sense that it may solve problems you already know about or challenges you already know about. So maybe it's time to go back and look at that list of outstanding administrative challenges or things that are affecting performance or things that are slowing your organization down, and say, are there AI solutions that can help solve these known problems? But you don't want to start the other way around and say, oh, there's AI and I'm just want people to show me all the AI magic they can. That's going to be very quickly a nest of crazy that is all kinds of solutions without a challenge. So instead, remember, stick to the basics. Think about the challenges you have that you've identified or potential challenges that you see growing, and then ask yourself, is there an AI solution for this that I haven't seen before? Maybe that could be of use to me. All right, now organizations are delving deep into closing the capability chasm. So they're looking at, can we build institutional capabilities? And that's become a more and more prescient challenge. The reason, obviously, is adaptability from point number one, right? We're more and more thinking about how can I rapidly leverage the top talent and skill that I have, and how can I continue to grow and evolve that talent and skill, because it's ultimately far easier to grow and evolve those great minds that you have as natural resources for your organization than it is to go out and constantly keep bringing new people in with specialized talents. They're also interested in matching their top talent to the highest value roles, and looking at that as a potential priority. In many cases, organizations are stuck in this sort of strange space where their existing top role is not necessarily being filled by the most appropriate person. And at the same time, they might have the talent in a nearby or tangential space, but that talent is not necessarily being recognized through the current system. So organizations are looking for ways to kind of resort that. This, again, according to McKinsey, not necessarily according to me, but I agree that more and more organizations are looking to optimize the benefits of their personnel in this way. Leadership becoming more and more critical. Only a quarter of organizations in this study said that their leaders are engaged in passionate and inspire employees to the best possible extent. Obviously, a disappointing number. And I think an interesting number to consider relative to where we are kind of in a historic arc. It's very important. We move so fast, and I think it's very important for us to recognize that it was only 3.5 years ago that we were in the heart of pandemic, that massive organizations were shut down, that we were in a very different kind of space. A lot of organizations took advantage of that time to upskill and train a lot of personnel, but a lot of sociocultural things happened there too. People re-examined whether or not all the working age persons in their home should actually be working, or whether they could optimize their home in a different way. People thought more about how they value their personal time versus their work time. And so all of those things have repercussions that are easily stretching into the now. And so it's important to kind of recognize that a part of leadership is ever more important that it be focused on having empathy for and understanding the conditions of the workforce. You know, if we look at the past 15 years, we're looking at very different needs from leadership as it relates to personnel and workforce, because we have gone from a place where there was, reasonably an excess of employees and personnel to solve the many problems that organizations have, to now where it's growing tighter and tighter, not necessarily because there aren't sufficient people, although there are some challenges there too, but more and more because there are more and more specializations, and there are more and more technology demands and other even soft skills demands that don't necessarily align with the capabilities that we're being presented with. So we find that it becomes an increasing struggle to match the right people to the right units, the right jobs, and so on. And it becomes problematic for leadership to align to those things. And so leadership training, now more than ever, increasingly important, and it's increasingly important that it not simply be leadership training from 20 years ago. It has to be redeveloped, reconsidered, reimagined, redeployed. A meaningful progress in DEI initiatives is becoming critical. 70% of organizations are prioritizing DEI, while only 47% have the necessary infrastructure for diversity, equity, and inclusion. These continue to be big processes in business, globally speaking, even though we're seeing, if we look at the more global cultural, sociocultural experience, we're seeing some blowback against this sort of thing in various geographies. Still in business, these are high priorities, and that is undoubtedly because there's a low tolerance among highly educated workforces for intolerance, for problems related to or aligned to DE&I. So that it's sort of a market pressure driving itself on the business side. Investing in employee mental health is becoming important. Here again, we see an increased awareness and empathy playing an increasing role. Efficiency is turning out to be one of the top 3 priorities in organizations. This not surprising as people challenge themselves with the questions related to what happens when the workplace is more hybrid, what happens in our organization when people have lesser contact. So I'm the world's biggest challenge of hybrid work, of working from home and other similar kinds of things. They bring tremendous advantages, but there are also huge challenges here. And that requires us to go back and revisit some of these things on multiple levels. I think notably in both the affective and the cognitive domains. So in other words, I think that there are behavioral aspects to hybrid employment that we need to go back and kind of visit at the same time as we're visiting the sort of logistics of hybrid employment, so that we can get people all to agree upon what does that mean when I talk about working in a hybrid situation. What does it mean both in terms of logistics and my responsibilities, but also what does it mean in terms of my behavior and the expectations about my behavior in a remote or an online only kind of environment. Okay. So moving right along, the next thought here is about the benefits of getting your talent management solutions right. And I think that one of the things that we see from the McKinsey report on state of organizations in 2023 is that companies that are successfully building human capital have consistent earning more so than their sector peers and show greater resilience. So the companies that have the most consistent earning are showing a tendency, according to the report, to continue to retain and build and develop their human capital. Bottom-up innovation, companies that combine people and performance success have a distinct organizational signature, and that fosters bottom-up innovation. That's largely about trust. And I think we avoid using words like trust in these kinds of situations, but it's important to do that. Ultimately, if we're in an organization where knowledge is hoarded, we're going to be in a situation where knowledge is not newly developed. It's very difficult to leverage innovation and to encourage innovation, and also to leverage the power of the entirety of the workforce if there's a historic tradition coming from a managerial style that leads to sort of fear of abuse, right? So, and this is still very much happening. I know I had a colleague recently who reported that they were in an organization where the organization had done a merger and then had very deliberately gone through and done obvious shoulder pushing kind of removal of large swaths of personnel. And I'm confident that an organization in that situation would think, oh yeah, we're optimizing costs, we're downsizing, we're effectively eliminating redundant positions and so on. Well, there's some big side effects there, and not the least of which is that you're substantially reducing your potential for any innovation or for long-term success from the organization, because now you've sort of lit the fire on all of the downline employees who felt abused in those situations. So it's the affective behavioral aspect of how we're treating employees. It's very important, especially in today's environment where it's so easy for an employee to simply jump ship, and then jump to a new position with a new organization. You're suffering significant loss when you lose all of that knowledge base and all of that wealth of capability for your organization. And then finally, leaders among peers, companies that manage people and performance well are more than 4.2 times more likely to feature in the top quintile of companies. So definitely there's a huge advantage for companies that are managing their people and their performance well, and doing right by their employees. Interesting to note here that there are skill gaps that continue to challenge organizations. 77% of organizations, according to both McKinsey and Gartner studies, 77% of organizations believe they will have meaningful skill gaps in the coming years. 53% of HR leaders believe talent competition to become more competitive in coming months, and 40% of employees are considering leaving their jobs in the near term. So if we just think about that for a second, the implications are that of an economy wherein it's increasingly easy for people to jump into other positions with other organizations. It's increasingly common to lose those personnel, and those have real costs. At the same time, skill gaps are increasingly a challenge that people are aware of, that the space between the skills they need for their organization to be successful and the skills that their current workforce has is problematic. And so that points to more effective upskilling and reskilling of the current workforce. If you have a workforce that's got reasonable competency, but that competency has aged, I would call that a normal workforce, right? If we look at Denning and Brown and the notion of the half-life of skills, depending on the specific discipline or field, and I apologize, I'm quoting academic studies without giving you a reference. Denning and Brown did a study on this notion of a half-life of skills, and the idea was that if you studied something, like went to college for it or took special workshops or something, some area, some topic, and you mastered that skill, that domain, then how long does that remain relevant? Now, we all can see that skills obviously don't remain relevant forever. I mean, I know how to dial a rotary phone. That's not a relevant skill. It's not something I should put on a resume, right? But there are skills that remain persistently relevant across a long period of time. Generally, those tend to be more soft skills or generalized skills. But there are also skills that can die kind of quickly, even though they are high technology skills. So these might have something to do with the specific software applications or technology that are utilized in conjunction with a specific area. But given that we have that exponential growth curve happening, that means that in many cases, that period of decay of the relevance of a skill is going to be very, very rapid. Big implications for you here. One, it means that the courses and content that you have need to be updated more frequently. As a side note, that means that you have to have mechanisms in place to update that content more and more frequently. That also means you have to figure out what are the financial benefits and potential risks of constant updation in order to keep up with a rapidly moving skill. Now, that's just that portion of it, the content. Now think about it from a perspective of your people. That means that people who maybe came in and you said they have to have a college degree, They have to be an engineer. They have to know this script and that script. They have to know these various ideas or skills. Well, Denning and Brown argue that for most skill sets, about 2.5 years is the average point at which the half-life makes the skill not really all that relevant. That is a short period of time. That means that in about just a little over half the time it takes to go get a 4-year college degree, then the bulk or the most important part of that has been lost because of the natural escalation of organizational development. So this is a tough thing to face for us. The only way for us to face this effectively is to provide opportunities for people in our organizations to upskill and to deal with motivation for people in our organizations to understand that their own upskilling is an obligation, a personal benefit, and a benefit to their organization, both their immediate group and the larger organization as a whole. And so to do that, we have to leverage a little understanding about what motivates people to actually learn, right? Now, we know that when it comes to learning, purpose, autonomy, mastery, these are the 3 major pillars that make a difference in terms of what motivates people to actually learn. So think about it this way. Purpose. Why am I taking this training? Why am I going to upskill myself in this field or this space? But the trick here is it's not about why as in the learning objectives for this course or ABC. I mean, that's important stuff, but it's not what the learner needs to know to establish purpose. Purpose is about what's it mean to me? What do I get from it? What is it going to do for me? Or what is it going to do for my unit, for my organization, or for my extended family, etc. So the purpose that we're talking about here that motivates the learner is a clear understanding that doing this is going to be a significant benefit. And if they, if it's clear to them that choosing to upskill is going to result in positive impact for them and for others, they're going to go ahead and choose to do it. When they make that choice to do it, the research tells us time and time again, when they make the choice to do it, they will learn far more and they will retain for a far longer period of time, and they'll develop a habit. You'll create a culture of learning. That's purpose. Autonomy means self-guidance, especially in a modern knowledge worker situation. People prefer to be self-guided. This isn't necessarily because they're vain or egomaniacal. It's because they're normal, right? They're all busy. They all have lots of other tasks to perform. We in learning and development are seldom their job one, right? So we tend to sort of come at them with a stick and say, oh, we're gonna punish you if you don't take this course or take this series of courses. Or we come at them with a carrot and say, hey, come on, take this series of courses and we'll reward you with a cookie, right? But the research says that what actually is the most effective way to do it is to help them understand the purpose and then give them freedom to make choices about when, where, and how to learn the new information, because they'll understand the motivation through the purpose, and then the choices, the freedom of time, will let them handle their own issues, their own schedule, their own priorities, their own etc. So autonomy, critical for understanding how to deliver these things. And then finally, the last one is mastery, and it's something we often forget. The last thing that motivates people is a clear understanding that they have mastered this new skill. So purpose, why should I master this new skill? Autonomy, how and when am I going to do it? And it's my own choice. And then finally, mastery, providing evidence back to the individual learner that what they did was to master skill A. If you can map this back to an understanding of talent within your organization, then people will begin to manage their own talent in order to guide their own career. That's the key. Help them understand, what does the talent or the skill set look like for other positions in your organization that allow them to rise, and then help them understand how all of this training is an opportunity for them to provide evidence to you and to the hiring agents in your organization that ultimately they will be qualified or better qualified for the positions that become available. Now, when you suddenly have a need to teach advanced JavaScript, or you have to suddenly teach AI to engineering teams, you can simply say to them, hey, here's the purpose, here's our organizational goals, here's why AI technology is so important. You can provide them with autonomy to take those courses in training, and you can reinforce the notion that they have mastered it. It has twofold results. One, you'll have motivated the learner really well. And two, more importantly for your organization, you'll have created a landscape wherein you have visibility into who's mastered the skills that you need. And so that skill gap gets closed. And that's a solid method in approaching that specific problem. All right, let me double check to see how we're doing. Okay. I feel bad for Emma. She's probably sitting there biting her nails. Will Alan complete anywhere near on time? No, I'm kidding. Okay. Don't forget, you're free to use the chat pod. I see there are a number of comments in there. Let me just double check quick and see. Oh, look, how funny. Emma's just reminded me that there's 15 minutes left. Oh, cool. And Angela says, think about how this impacts potential candidates. Employees are leaving. Reviews about culture, learning opportunities, and culture. Candidates may even accept and may not even accept interviews based on the reviews. That's an excellent point, Angela. You know, I mean, we see these things like Glassdoor and more, where people are looking toward those kinds of things to make decisions about whether or not they're even going to apply for an organization. And that kind of pre analysis is something that we're not used to, and it does make a substantial impact, and it's also much more flexible than what we're used to. Like I think, for example, Adobe is very proud to have for many years been at the top part of the top 10 global companies by many indexes, right? Those indexes come out once a year. Glassdoor reviews come out every time somebody clicks a button on the site. So that means that the sort of winds of awareness for various organizations can ebb and flow from day to day and month to month. And you ultimately want to try to ensure that the personnel in your organization are happy, even personnel that had problems. At the very least, they should feel that your organization was fair and that your organization had opportunities and followed through on them. And some of these things, you know, following this sort of plan for talent and communicating it to them can make a huge difference, because when we're not just, you know, whipping people with a stick to try to get them to complete their compliance courses, and instead we're providing this kind of landscape of motivation, we do get better results. I had a customer that started actually quite a ways back, and wow, I just realized almost 10 years ago, one of the first customers for the Adobe Learning Manager, and they started with this sort of fundamental question of, will we be opt-in or will we be, what will our motivation and rationale be? And they chose to be opt-in. And they went from nothing to several thousand people opting in on their own in the first month or two. Very quickly, they were up to 7,000 and then 20,000, and then all the way up to today, there are over 100,000 people across their entire organization, all of them opting in because the quality, the challenge, the approach is consistently implemented across all these things, and then people see the value, right? That there's no question about the value because it's all been designed to be valuable for these folks in their careers and to provide them with a kind of landscape tapestry. So, you know, as my old doctoral professor used to tell me, there's no replacing planning. So he would always say, spend a third of your time planning. And I would always say, that is impossible. No one has all that time. But over time, I have seen that he was unquestionably right, that spending a third of your time planning projects is a really good use of your time. It will result in much more beneficial outcomes. All right, so key challenges in talent management then, these from the Gartner report, again, from the link below. 64% of HR leaders have limited access for qualified talent. 47% of HR leaders find skill gaps or mismatched job requirements as a key factor or concern. 41% find cross-industry competition as an issue, and then 28% believe limited investment in employee development to be a major issue. So these just, challenges that continue to be faced across the industry. Now, the range of initiatives that are addressing the talent and skills gap look like this, according to Gartner. Expanding DE&I efforts, 63% looking to expand their DE&I. 59% are looking at more training opportunities. 57% flexible work arrangements. 57% of organizations are incorporating flexible work. And 56% of organizations are looking at building internal talent marketplaces to facilitate lateral movements, while 27% are equipping managers to drive on-the-job learning for employees. All of these things just echo that, in fact, the problems that we identified at the beginning, or the challenge, are things that organizations are actively doing, according to Gartner, to address these specific issues. Skills that are being prioritized to address talent management, about 45% are prioritizing leadership. I hear this every time I go and speak anywhere. I'm seeing more people that are leadership only on various learning teams. It is definitely a high priority. About 45 to 50% are prioritizing critical thinking and decision making. This does not surprise me one iota. I taught college for a quarter of a century. Now I'm making myself seem really old, aren't I? I taught college for a quarter of a century, and if you asked me, I would have said critical thinking, decision making. These are the most important skills which are not effectively taught in college. And if you ask most people in business, they will tell you critical thinking, an ability to work independently, an ability to solve your own problems, things like decision making. These are the fundamental skills which are seriously lacking in incoming college level employees. In fact, a lot of people deal with this simply by saying that the position requires some on-the-job experience post-college, because they're unwilling to work with that fresh out of college person who lacks these skills. So not surprising here that we're seeing that these listed as the major challenges that people are facing. These are the same challenges that people were facing 20 years ago when it comes to critical thinking and decision making. But I think they're more important now than they've ever been, because if you're going to constantly adapt, at the very core, you should have scientific method, critical thinking, decision making, and so on. These fundamental skills, data analysis, and so on, these should all be at the core of what makes up your personhood as an employee, because that's ultimately what you're going to fall back on time and time again, regardless of what specialization you're dealing with. 30 to 40% are focusing on continuous learning. 25 to 40% training employees on basic digital skills, while 40% are focusing on advanced data analysis, and 20 to 40% are focusing on interpersonal skills and empathy, right? Of course they are, because this is what happens in the office, right? You can have the most efficient organization in the world, but Tom is still going to fight with Jill for no apparent reason, right? That ultimately, time and time again, you're going to come back to these kind of behavioral issues. I think one of the reasons that we face this is, certainly in the US, I don't know about the rest of the world, is because cognitive and affective domains are essentially separated in the lower education space. And affective domain education is something that's barely addressed beyond the lowest level grades. So when you do that, you're going to have fundamental problems with things like empathy. You have to expand to understand that people are whole peoples. And so it is possible to improve skills like listening skills, empathy skills, working with groups, and so on. And some time spent on these. We shouldn't operate on the assumption that this is dealt in their kindergarten class, because ultimately it's clearly not, right? So ultimately we have to make those adjustments and assessments. All right. And I'm just double checking to see. I think I'm I'm behind. Am I in trouble?
Never. Of course you're not in trouble, no. But
Oh,
we
no.
are at the end of our session time, so we have another session, our leader talk, beginning in just 15 minutes. So I'll give you a couple minutes just to wrap this up.
Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up by saying I hope you'll check the McKinsey and Gartner reports. They're absolutely fascinating. I'll also mention that, when we look at the format of trainings, we can divide that format of trainings into personalization, automated nudges, consolidating the learning experiences, and user-friendly capability building and continuous engagement. These are all fundamentally these notions that are introduced in the study that help us understand that the format that we choose for the training is growing more sophisticated, but ultimately things like consolidating the learning experience into one unified thing is about ease of use. It's about making it convenient for the learner so that it's kind of one-stop watering hole, right? But also recognizing things like behavioral concerns and time schedules and so on that require stuff like automated nudges. And then the segment of one notion is all about personalization. It's about developing ever improved solutions that allow people to get messages that are directed specifically to them, that acknowledge and understand what their role is in the organization, what their skills are, and how their skills could be improved. So these aspects are things, obviously, that we focus on at Adobe with the Adobe Learning Manager Tech, and I hope you'll check it out if you get a chance. And with that, I will pass it back to Emily. Hey, Emma. Sorry, I called you Emily. I was
No
thinking of my
problem.
niece. I have a niece named Emily.
All right.
Emma.
Thank you, Alan, so much for your presentation. This has been great. Like I said, we are out of time, but if you have questions for Dr. Partridge, send them our way. You can reply to the follow-up email that you'll get from us. And he's also going to get a copy of the chat, so he might be reaching out to you that way as well. Up next, well, first we have a 15-minute break, but up next we have Mandy Varley and Beva Beckwith joining us from Torch for their session on building a coaching culture for exceptional employee engagement. I'll see y'all there. In just a moment, I'm going to end this session, and you can join the next one by going over to the event lobby and clicking on the Sessions tab.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks again,
everybody.
Alan.
Emma, they can download the PDF, yeah?
Yes, the PDF, the slides, and the video recording of the session will be in their follow-up email.
You'll find the link to the reports in there too. Thanks, everybody.